the latest episode of the PCT podcast, we are joined by performance psychology consultant Philippa McGregor. Philippa speaks to us about adolescence and the adolescent brain and how we as coaches can identify and adapt our practices to help others. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, like, share, drop us a review, and we hope you enjoy the latest episode.
On the latest episode of the PCT podcast, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome Philippa McGregor. So without further ado, good evening, Philippa. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Martin. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Obviously, we're recording this during, I think, week 9 of lockdown. I forgot what week it is. How are you finding lockdown, and how has it changed the way that you're working at the minute?
Yeah, really different. Quite drastically different, to be honest, which is created a real sense of challenge for me, like especially at the beginning. So I was used to kind of traveling 2 to 3 days a week, minimum, really, like up and down the country, and also abroad, internationally, with some of the consultancy stuff I was doing. And then literally was on an England camp, got the call that or the head coach got the call that the tournaments we were awaiting, Slovakia, Wales and France, to join us at St George's Park, that was off, and that everyone, including staff, was to be sent home immediately. And since then, just very different. Like, as a psychologist, you're used to that, not just interaction with people, because you can get that to an extent over a Zoom call, which is great, but that like actual person connection, and I've really missed it. Really missed it. So life has been very different. I've never in a long time been in the same place for the length of time that I've been now in lockdown, never mind being in the northeast for this long. So it has some perks, even though I can't see family or whatever. So
yeah, it's certainly
very different.
A strange and, as you say, different time whilst we go further and further into lockdown. I mean, for anybody that's not aware of obviously the work and the roles that you currently hold, do you mind just give us an insight into what it is that you do and how hectic your life is at the minute?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kind of give a little bit of background on kind of academic side, because that's kind of going to be, I guess, some of the bits that I'm going to share with you on the podcast from hopefully an expertise perspective or a knowledge perspective. So I started, I went to St Mary's University in London and did an undergraduate degree in sports science. So I had a real kind of passion for the different disciplines within sport, and didn't at that stage know quite where I wanted to specialise. But by the time I came to the end of my third year, it was quite clear that psychology was a bit of a niche for me, and it was also something I was quite passionate about. So I stayed down in London and did my master's in sports psychology at St Mary's. And then academically, that was then followed a number of years later, after a bit of a break, by my PhD, which I've recently just completed at Loughborough University. And then, I guess, from a qualification standpoint, my professional accreditation, that kind of gives me the stamp to kind of say that I'm allowed to do what I say that I do. And I've kind of got that that chartered scientist status to be able to practice as a performance in performance psychology support.
Wow.
So that's kind of academic qualification stuff. And then from a role perspective, currently, so in the past year, I made the decision to go self-employed.
Okay.
So I was at Manchester City for 5 seasons, and before that I was at Fulham Football Club down in London for 6, and working in a range of kind of other different sports. But as of last year, I kind of decided that it was time to move back to the northeast, so set up my own consultancy business, which has been amazing this year. Like, has brought a real variety to the work that I do within performance psychology. So I'm kind of branched out into more business and corporate environments, working with a phenomenal company in the Peak District called Mindflick. So they've kind of given me those experiences within slightly different context to what I've been used to. And from a sports perspective, very much kind of kept my hand in the football sector, consulting for the FA, specifically working with the women's under-17s national team, which again was really different for me because my career to date has been in men's football, in boys' academies. So that's been another real welcomed, a real welcome variety. And then just a range of other like projects going on with UK Coaching, a company called My Mentor, doing some project-based work for them. So really enjoying the variety despite the distance that COVID-19 is presenting.
I mean, one thing I just wanted to touch on from that, obviously being from the Northeast, spent a lot of time down south, and we're going to speak about sort of the psych corner and psychology. How did you find that? So if there's anybody listening who's maybe a bit anxious about moving away and studying a trade, for example, what advice would you give for that, moving away at a young age?
What was it scary? Absolutely. Like, you know, I'd never lived away from home before, but I think for me, thinking about opportunities, you know, they, not that they weren't around in the Northeast, I'm sure they were, but I was also well aware of sometimes you have to spread your wings and you have to step outside your comfort zone and do the thing that scares you most. And yeah, moving to London was a massive deal. I moved down the first weekend. The next weekend, my mum was already there visiting. So you know, it's not the other side. It's not the other side of the world. But I think from a personal and professional development standpoint, it was the best thing I ever done. Best thing I ever did. It learned me so much, not just professionally, and it didn't just allow me to get my career kick-started, but also personally. You know, developing that independence and having to, you know, seek opportunities and things out for yourself. You know, I didn't have any contacts or links in the south of the country, so it almost forces you to do that and maybe, you know, seek opportunities or network with people or put yourself out there that little bit more, because there's nobody there to do it for you. Yeah. So for me, yeah, it was one of the best decisions that I made, and I'm so grateful for all of the opportunities that were then afforded to me, that, you know, from being down in London. So my advice would be, yeah, do that thing that scares you, take the leap. And you know what, if it doesn't work, that's okay. You can go back and there can be another path. Like, but you never want to be left with, oh, what if I just give that a go, you know. So I think that was a big thing for me. I gave it a go. I didn't want to be left with a what if, and I was bold, took the risk, and moved down south to a very different culture and if you like, to what I was used to in the Northeast.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, just going back to sort of the academia side of things, you've been involved in a number of publishings. How can the listeners sort of have a look at these and what they are based around?
Yeah, so I guess the most recent two, and the two that are probably most relevant to kind of the football world, would be within the past year, I worked with some colleagues from Manchester City, and we wrote a book chapter for Jamie Barker and some other academic and sports psychologists, which is called The Psychology of Football. And I think the idea behind this book was to almost capture the applied practices and ways of working from kind of different fields of leadership, of academy football, of kind of different psychology topics within, but specifically within football. And in our chapter that we wrote, we really almost like laid ourselves out and really shared how we developed and integrated psychology into Manchester City Academy, but then more broadly within the City Football Group and the other clubs that we were then linked with. So we shared our approach for that. So ours is basically like a case study chapter in that book, which outlines kind of how we went about doing what we did in 2014-15 when psychology in Manchester City Academy didn't exist. Yeah. which often surprises people. Given that, you know, when I was my previous role at Fulham, we'd had it integrated since 2010, 2011.
Yeah, wow, big move. I mean, I had the absolute honour of being in attendance of one of the workshops you delivered on the Youth Development Phase Advanced Youth Award for the FA. And a lot of the information that you presented really hit home for me, just with some of the young people that I was working with at the time. How much of a challenge is it to be an effective coach in the YD phase if we take into account that, you know, that child is going from primary school to high school or secondary school?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge, but more importantly, it's a huge responsibility. You know, the YDP phase coincides with the period of adolescence, which we know is the second biggest developmental phase of anybody's life. So the first phase being between 0 and 3, we go through huge development changes, you know, once we're born. And then the second biggest development stage is when we hit that period of adolescence. And it's also YDP, adolescence, a phase and a period of development that coincides with puberty. So they're going, you know, players in these age groups are going through profound changes physically, biologically, socially, emotionally, cognitively, you know, all of which they're trying to learn about themselves and how they fit in and how kind of the world works. And those of us who are working with them are also trying to keep up and, you know, check in on mood and how they're doing with all of those kind of changes that are going on. And I guess one of the biggest challenges is especially for those of us who work in sport, and this isn't just a kind of the elite end at all, but is that the physical maturation quite often of young people who are involved in sport can create quite a different impression compared to maybe their cognitive, emotional, social development skills. So sometimes you can be, you know, have a 13-year-old lad stood in front of you and he might look about 16 when he's from a physical standpoint with maybe some of the early developers that you're working with. But I think one of the challenges comes from the fact that children's brains are not fully formed and developed until way into their 20s. You know, it could be right up until 30, where when I say developed, I mean from a functioning standpoint. Our brains always, you know, we're always learning new stuff, so it's continuing to evolve. But from a brain development standpoint, adolescence marks a really vulnerable stage. And we can't see that. So, you know, and it's not something that everyone always reads about or talks too much about. It's being spoken about a lot more now, which is great. But I think in high performance environments as well, or in sports environments whereby you know, you'll often find that those young people, whether it be at grassroots level or whether it be at academy level, in various sports, they do almost grow up a little bit quicker, just because of that kind of, you know, what it's like to go to training and have a schedule and have things, you know, you've got to get your equipment and things to look after, and you've got to be part of a team. You know, that often kind of excels some development for sure, just due to that environment. But I think with that, one of the challenges that often comes, and I include myself in this bracket absolutely, is that, you know, we can see maybe someone who looks very physically mature. We can have you can have a conversation with a 12-year-old that maybe a normal, I use that term very loosely, 12-year-old just couldn't have with an adult. We can be really prone to forget that children and adolescents are not mini adults. Yeah. So this stage of development, where, you know, what YDP or adolescence, whatever you want to call it, is, you know, requires real awareness and understanding. And I firmly believe, and I bang this drum a lot in terms of my applied practice and role is you know, within psychology, is that I believe that all individuals, whether it be teachers in schools, youth workers, coaches, support staff who are fortunate enough to work with young people, and especially those individuals who are fortunate enough to work with talented young people, should work in a developmentally attuned way. That is, they should be tailoring their work and their support accordingly to the specific stage of development that young person's at. And it's interesting because we talk about the YDP phase and we talk about adolescence, and even those are umbrella terms, because adolescence is split into three subcategories. You've got your early adolescence, your mid adolescence, and your late adolescence. all of which are going through different developmental trajectories. So the complexity of working with that age group, I think, is what presents the challenge. And I think the responsibility and the duty of care that we have of working with young people during the second biggest developmental stage of their life is pretty profound and important to take seriously. And it does amaze me, and it's great now to be involved in, you know, some of the work that you were saying around the AYA and some other project-based stuff where people are now acknowledging that actually when this developmental awareness stuff is really important, and it's not just the job of the psychologist or the welfare officer or the well-being person. Actually, we all need to understand it to help us to effectively inform our practice.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke off air about, you know, we're very fortunate on the AYA to get this level of, you know, content and knowledge from the experts, but really it shouldn't matter whether we are high performing elite academy coaches or grassroots, because we have such an influence on these youngsters that, you know, and I was speaking to a county coach developer yesterday from the FA that they're looking at integrating it now, a lot of the psychology stuff that we're learning on the AYA onto the level ones, because as we mentioned, just how important is it? You know, one thing I saw this year was, you know, looking at a child coming in on a Friday at 7:00 and thinking, oh God, they look tired. Now last year I was like, oh, what's up with them? Are they not sleeping well? But then through the AYA and speaking with other people, understanding they've just gone to high school. All the social and psychological factors that go into that, they might just want to play on Friday. You know, they don't want to listen to me talking and banging on. They just want to play and enjoy that. And just one thing I wanted to ask is, what would you say the main challenges that any coach faces when they go into that adolescence phase at 12 years old?
Oh, never mind coaches, parents, teachers, the lot are going to get these sorts of challenges. I think the emotional development challenges that comes with this stage of development are really challenging, and are the things that can sometimes cause us frustration and confusion and uncertainty, because we're not really sure what's going on. But I think the things to kind of be aware of around kind of the emotional development challenges, and like you say, this doesn't matter if we're talking about a player who just plays on a Sunday at his local club, or someone who plays for, you know, one of the top clubs in the Premier League, because ultimately, before any of these adolescents or children are footballers, they are people. And they're young people, and they're young people who are going, who all go in different ways at different times through these developmental changes. And from an emotional standpoint, they are experiencing a range of new emotions and new combinations of emotions on a daily basis. So they'll be feeling new things that they've never really felt before and aren't really even sure what it is. You know, a combination of feeling really sad and really angry at the same time. You know, what does that give? You know, maybe that's frustration. And sometimes even they won't know why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, never mind you as the coach, or you as mum or dad, or you as the teacher, knowing why it is the way, you know, the why it is that they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And you know, they're experiencing these various different emotional challenges without necessarily having the strategies in place to know how to deal with them. And that's difficult, because I'm experiencing something, I'm feeling something that I either don't know why I'm feeling it, or I don't know what it is, but I also don't know how to deal with it. And something like emotional regulation or emotional control, it's kind of different terminologies that are used, is a developmental skill. It's something that develops with age and experience. So I think, the emotional challenges would be one for sure. Another one would be the social challenges. So unfortunately for us, as either coaches or support staff or parents, during these adolescent years, we are not the most important people. Peers are the most important people, and as young people are trying to kind of find themselves or position themselves within their social groups, peer relationships are super important. And that again can present some challenges, friendship challenges, conflicts, all of the things that I'm sure we've all been subject to experience in our younger years. But the social development challenges are huge, because it's socially, that's almost top of the list for a young person, especially if we think about in a sports environment perspective, whereby even if it is grassroots level, like you want to be on that team on Sunday. You want to be picked, and you don't want to be picked there, you want to be picked there, and you want to be the one who gets that positive reinforcement, and you also want to be the one that people like, and you kind of you're trying to find where you fit in. So I think that can be really challenging. And then I think the third thing, and I know I'm probably getting really psyche on this stuff, but is I guess the cognitive development challenges that come with that. So during that period of adolescence, one of the things that we know about that phase of development is that young people who are in that phase aren't necessarily great at being able to take perspective. So they're not able to kind of switch the view on things or see things from your point of view. And so no matter how much planning you've put into that session and how late you stayed up that night before, like, they just don't see that. No, don't get it. Because their ability to take perspective or see things through someone else's eyes is still developing. So again, kind of going back to that point that they're not mini adults, their brains are still undergoing massive changes. They're still learning to kind of try and regulate the emotion and the logical parts of their brain. So I think that can present some challenges from a performance standpoint, regardless of the level that you're talking about.
I mean, with all that in mind, as well as organising match days, training, and all the planning that goes into it, is there any particular changes that coaches should look for in their players? Their people during adolescence, physical, emotional, and you mentioned their cognitive and social biological behaviours. Is there any one that stands out, or see them all?
Yeah, I think, and the difficult thing is there's going to be all of those different types of changes, but they're not. So even if you've got, say, the under 12s, they're not all going to go through exactly the same changes at exactly the same time.
Yeah,
you're going to have some early developers, some late developers. Again, what some of the psychology researchers looked at is some of your late developers from a physical standpoint, physically may be behind some of your early developers, but actually from a cognitive, emotion and emotional, even maybe social standpoint, can often actually be quite more advanced because they've had to be, because they can't rely on their physical skill. So it's really difficult to say, these are the things to look out for, but for sure, are there going to be markers of kind of within that early adolescence, mid-adolescence, late adolescence period for each of those things? Absolutely. But the challenge is you're probably going to have a squad of 20 who are all going through all of those changes, but it's slightly different times and also in slightly different ways, because as much as the period of I've maybe almost framed it as too negative, and it's not meant to be that, because some young people will absolutely breeze through adolescence and manage their emotions and engage great in different relationships and physically just kind of tuttle on through different stages of development, whereas others will struggle a lot more.
I mean, one of the key things from the workshop that you delivered was around adolescent emotional development. Now, that sounds quite in depth. Are you able to just give us a little bit of insight and findings behind what that looks like?
Yeah. So we in the session that you set in on, we started a little bit talking about kind of the adolescent brain and how that develops, but from I guess a research standpoint, and where kind of my PhD sat was well, actually, if we know that the development of emotion related skills is a developmental skill, as in they'll get better at it when they get older, that great, we've got that awareness. But when we're working in a performance environment, again, take the level of performance out of it. But when we're working with young people who have to perform, we almost need to, from an emotional standpoint, we need to facilitate, or we need to fast track some of those emotion related skills. So through my research, one of the things that we found and ultimately delivered, actually through the research itself, through some intervention work, was in order to help players effectively develop what we call emotional regulation strategies. So strategies that are going to help them manage the emotional experiences that they have, almost cope with the roller coaster of different emotions that's likely to come into their day, never mind the week. Is that we need to first of all develop emotional awareness. So those things come kind of hand in hand, and to get emotional awareness, we need to be able to talk openly about emotions. And if we're talking about emotional development in a sports setting, the people who need to be able to talk openly about emotions are going to be the staff that are involved with those players. The most important staff being the coaches. So coaches, openness to, or acceptance of recognizing that actually the one thing that we have in common as humans is that we all feel. We all have, and that's both a gift and a curse, emotions of humans for sure. But if we want to help young people manage some of these emotional challenges, then we have to be able to help them develop a level of emotional awareness, and that comes from being able to talk openly about emotions. And as coach, maybe being a bit vulnerable in sharing maybe some of the things that you felt on that match day, or that you've experienced in that training session. And I guess as adults, we're meant to be a bit better at managing our emotions. Even though, at times have all been hijacked. But I guess from a performance standpoint, that's really important, and even more important when you're working with young people, because the stage of development, remember, they're like sponges. Yeah. They're gonna, even when you don't realize that they're taking things on board, that they're modeling and learning from you all the time. So I think the importance of developing that emotional awareness in your young players through just having conversations about emotions, sharing your own emotions, and being open to having, I guess, those softer conversations about those aspects of performance is fundamentally important. The second, I guess, in insight, or some of the things that we did in the research, was recognize that due to the stage of development that they're at, and the development of the connections that are still forming between the emotional brain and the logical rational brain, when emotions of a young person are high or heightened, or more sensitive for whatever reason, you need to be the logical rational one. Okay. Because we're meant to be a bit better at that. So it's almost not getting caught on the emotional roller coaster with them, and actually being the one who recognizes that he or she they're going, or they've gone. Okay, how do I help just bring them back down? How can I bring some logic and some rationality to this situation, and maybe not help them, and not let them get too distressed by this, whilst at the same time, and this is the challenge, and this is where people are like, you're joking, we've got to do all of that. You're being the logical rational one, you're trying to I guess reduce the distress that they're experiencing that time, but at the same time recognizing that it's an important part of their development to experience these different emotions. So you've almost got to let them ride the roller coaster at times as well, and be the one who has this knowledge and awareness and understanding of the importance of this area, and then through through your craft and through your ability to take that knowledge and translate it into practice in whatever way that might look like for you. That's the important bit. And that's often the bit where you sit down and you have some great conversations for, how might I do that? Or how might that come to life? And that's going to be different for everyone, because all of our crafts are very are unique and slightly different. The way I work as a psychologist on this area is maybe going to be slightly different how somebody else who offers psych support works in this area. And then I guess one of the most important things kind of linked with that, what came from the research that we did, was that naturally, and this isn't just adolescents, but maybe more so adolescents who are involved in some sort of performance, are going to have the natural tendency to suppress, to try and, linking back to kind of some of the social challenges. I don't want to show my friends that I'm upset or that I'm frustrated or whatever it might be. So one of the strategies is naturally going to be to suppress those emotions. We don't need to encourage that. They're going to probably do that quite naturally anyway, and that's going to be okay. We all do that. But it's not a strategy that, from a psychological standpoint, would want to be promoting or encouraging in terms of that being our recommendation. But also B, it's not a strategy that long term is going to have any kind of adaptive emotional regulation effects, if you like, because all we're doing is suppressing. We can only suppress for so long. So as a coach or as a member of the performance team, we don't want to be encouraging that. We'll recognize that it's probably going to happen, but actually what we can be doing is encouraging more adaptive and more positive types of emotion coping. And what we call that is maybe some sort of like cognitive appraisal type of coping, whereby actually we will help the young person maybe think slightly differently about the situation, whether it be through acknowledging the emotions that they're experiencing, having a conversation about it, reframing the situation, helping them take perspective. Those are the types of strategies that we know are going to be really effective, but also adaptive from a developmental standpoint. They're going to do the suppression stuff anyway, but so we don't need to encourage that, and but also we need to be accepting of that's probably going to occur, especially in the moment when they're still kind of learning these other strategies. But that was a big thing that kind of came out of it, in terms of the types of coping, the types of kind of emotional regulation strategies that we see kind of present themselves within elite youth performance.
I mean, as you mentioned there, there's a complete range of emotions that not only the child goes through, but the coach may go through.
Absolutely,
there's particularly 3 emotions that adolescents are sensitive to. Do you mind just sharing a bit on that, and how as coaches we can maybe adapt our delivery and behaviours to reduce exposure?
Yeah, for sure. So we know that during adolescence, there's 3 emotions that cause particular sensitivity. And if we're not careful, if a young person experiences a really high dose of these of these emotions, they actually can be quite toxic and actually really, really difficult for them to deal with, and kind of go then down a really distressing path, which is not the place that we want to get to, especially not in a sports environment. So 3 emotions: stress, anxiety, and shame. They're the 3 emotions that create particular sensitivity in young people. So stress, just to kind of give, I guess, a little bit of a definition of each of them. Stress is when there's a perceived imbalance between the demands of the environment or the situation and the individual's perceived ability to be able to cope. So this is what the environment's presenting to me. These are the challenges, demands. How do I think that I can cope with that? And if the demands exceed the level of coping abilities, then we experience stress. Anxiety, really closely related to stress, and you often find that the 2 actually can come quite closely in hand in hand. But anxiety is a very normal emotion. We all worry and doubt ourselves at times. And anxiety is an emotion that kind of dates back to our cavemen days, if you like, because it's the emotion that kept us safe, because it's the emotion that essentially tells us we're in danger, there's a threat here. It makes us doubt, it makes us worry, it makes us maybe question a little bit more. So it's very survival driven. It's something that we will all experience at some stage. But for a young person, you know, if high levels of doubt and worry and fear and that level of threat becomes really high, that can be quite distressing. And again, we can see how an emotion like that can actually present itself quite frequently in performance environments. You know, when you playing that game, or you're up for that trial, or whatever it might be. And then the third one being shame. So shame develops from, I guess, is an emotion that presents itself during adolescence because it comes from developing the capacity to think about what others are thinking about you. And that almost that, you know, that worry. So, you know, very, very, very closely linked, the three. And in terms of how you're able to support those emotions, I guess from a stress and anxiety perspective, what we often see when someone experiences those emotions is that they can become quite fixed in terms of their thinking. So they can become less adaptable. That logical, rational, emotional brain definitely isn't in any sort of in any sort of swing. So for what we need to be able to do is almost try and facilitate that young person when those levels of stress and anxiety are high, is to help them kind of take that perspective through trying to switch their thinking, trying to alter the way they're thinking about that situation to help reduce those levels of those emotions. Remember, they're not good at being able to do that by themselves, so they need us to maybe be able to help them take that perspective and look at things slightly differently. I think the second thing is maybe slightly harder, but almost that acceptance that emotions are going to come and go, and actually as much as those emotions are maybe slightly unpleasant, they're actually important to experience. Like, we need to learn how to deal with stress. We need, you know, anxiety, we're all going to experience it. So we've almost got to be careful that we don't meddle or suppress those emotions, but almost learn the young person a way of kind of accepting that, you know, when I'm feeling stressed, that's probably exactly how I'm meant to be feeling, and I'm feeling stressed for these reasons. So that level of acceptance, and the analogy that I've used in the past when working with young players to help them manage these types of emotion is being quicksand. So if you fell in quicksand, what's your brain going to tell you to do? Get out. Yeah, like fight it. So, okay, brain's telling you, fall in the quicksand, I've got to fight it, I've got to get out. What's going to happen? I'm probably not going to get out. And what's going to happen as a result of that? I'm going to get tired. Yeah. So you're losing, right? You're trying to fight the quicksand, you're trying to get out. It's not working. So actually, it's almost doing the reverse of what your brain's telling you, and being like, okay, I'm in this. I almost need to accept this situation. I need to try and relax. And actually then hopefully I'll drift out of the quicksand. So that level of acceptance, so especially when experiencing difficult and unpleasant emotions, almost just recognizing that, yeah, that is how I'm feeling. I am feeling really nervous. I am feeling really anxious. I am feeling really frustrated. So recognizing the emotion, accepting it, but definitely not fighting it, because the more you fight it, the worse that it gets. And emotions are pretty powerful. I don't know if I shared this fact in the session that I did with you guys, but the emotional part of our brain is 5 times more powerful than the logical, rational thinking brain. So when that emotional brain is kicking off, and it's in full flow, and you're trying to fight the emotions that you're experiencing as a result of that, you're not going to win. Yeah. So almost teaching that or helping them understand that way of recognizing the emotion, coming back to building that emotional awareness. I am stressed. You know what it is, coach? I'm really stressed today. We've acknowledged the emotion, and we're almost creating a bit of acceptance that is how I'm feeling. So instead of trying to fight against feeling that stress, I'm almost accepting that it's there, and I'm letting somebody know that it's there. Yeah. And creating an environment where those sorts of conversations happen is like gold. And then I guess the third thing, or slightly linking with that one, would be helping to refocus after that. So you have the emotional experience. It's almost that the reaction happens. It's releasing it in some sort of way, but then creating a refocus. So rather than kind of attention being all over the place, or attention getting pulled into the feeling, which really isn't uncontrollable, because it's gonna be there for however long it needs to be there. And the more you get sucked into it, the stronger it's going to get. You're almost giving it more power. But if you can refocus on something else and make it maybe more, so whether it be like, I don't know, related to some like process goals or kind of 3 key targets, or give an alternative focus, that's something that's really gonna help.
I mean, that leads me on nicely to one of the key points I took away from the workshop was, and you know, it might not be the most politically correct way of saying it, is that the more emotional the person, the more stupid the decision. And I think any coaches listening will be able to, you know, link with that and understand that we've all seen players, and we've done it as coaches and, you know, as players ourselves, that we're emotional, we're frustrated, we're wound up, we might be stressed, and we go flying into that tackle, and all of a sudden it's, world's caved in, it's gone. You know, how can we support that when a player becomes so emotional and they're making these rash decisions? How can we help with that?
So yeah, I think kind of similar strategies to kind of what I've just spoken through there. But another thing would be to kind of think about kind of what's that, you know, what's occurring in that situation. So first of all, what's triggering the emotion? Yeah. So do we know what the, you know, if a young player is getting, I don't know, say it is some of those more negative emotions, or even say like overly excited or frustrated or whatever, angry, what are the cues that are triggering that emotional experience? So when, again, kind of raising awareness of those. One, are you aware of them as the coach in terms of what is it that pushes these buttons to get to that response? Where's that coming from? You understanding it and the player understanding it. So having that conversation, spending time having, you know, whether it be, do you know when it happens? It happens when he doesn't start, or it happens when she gets a bad call's made against her and the ref doesn't make a decision her way. It happens when she doesn't get the pass that she wants when she's on the edge of the box. And every time, if someone doesn't give her that pass, we see it happen. So identify what the triggers are is, I think, definitely step number one. Then kind of exploring. So when this happens, what do we see? What do we see? And the reason why we do this part is in terms of, I guess, what this would be the response bit, is we'll get the young person to think about, you know, what does that look like? What do I do? Oh, well, like my head goes down, my effort levels reduce, or I start you know, doing things really quickly and moving all over the pitch. I come out of position. I'm short-tempered with people. So we identify what the response is. And then the third thing would be to then say, okay, so what's the outcome? What's the reward of all that? Well, I don't know, maybe like makes us feel a bit better, or get it off my chest, or yeah, like I guess that experience of release, say. Okay, so with that, we've kind of got 3 stages. We've got what triggers the response, we've kind of explored that, linking with the emotional awareness stuff. We've then gone to the response itself, and we've identified, what do we see from your actions and behaviors that goes on when you experience that emotion? And then we've gone, okay, so what's the outcome of that? Well, I get my emotional release, or I'm pulled off, switch positions, or I don't play the whole game, or I don't play the next game, whatever it might be, if it's been a negative emotion. So what we want is, or what we have to accept, is that actually the triggers probably aren't going to change. We can't stop the ref making the bad calls. We're not going to suddenly make you start every single game. You're not always going to play in that favourite position. There's not always going to be great weather conditions. And no, you're not always going to get the ball when you're on the edge of the box. So that's not going to change. There's nothing we can do about that. The outcome bit, I guess if it's being pulled off or a negative bit, like that could be a changeable factor. But in terms of the reward that you're getting, in terms of the emotional release, actually we don't want to change that either. So we want you to experience those triggers, have the outcome of the release of the emotion, but actually the thing that we need to target then, the thing that needs to change, is the response. And guess what? We can change that, because the things that we've described are your actions and behaviors. Those are things that you are in direct control over. Your actions and your behaviors, although you might not think you do, you have a choice over them. Yeah. And that's going to be the thing we change. So then almost working through that process of being, how we're going to change, what needs to be different about that action or behavior? What needs to be different about that action or behavior? And we then create a new middle bit. Yeah. So we're still experiencing the same triggers. We still get the release of the emotion at the other end, but actually the bit in the middle is much more adaptive. It's much more positive. So maybe kind of a little in that technique or strategy came not necessarily from a psychology book, but it came from the habit loop book, the Power of Habit book, where they talk about habit loops. And I've just adapted it to work from an emotional standpoint to facilitate kind of coach player work around this area.
No, it's really interesting there that you're saying we can control the response, and I think that's going to be powerful for me, certainly moving forward, and how I can adapt to that. Something you alluded to right at the beginning of the chat was obviously adolescence is the second biggest development stage in their lives. And we go on about, the brain constantly developing it, and it's not fully formed until, up to age 30. Just how active is the teenage brain at this stage?
Oh, I mean, like, I don't know how you quantify it, but in terms of kind of the pruning of all, you think of the hundreds of millions of neurons that are in the brain, and the stimulation that's going on for a young person. Because remember, as adults, our brains aren't stimulated because we've been through lots of experiences. There's less novelty in our life as an adult than there is in the life of an adolescent or a child. They're experiencing new things on a daily basis, whether that be an emotion or whether that be a situation, whether that be a relationship, whether that be, a challenge. They're experiencing a lot of novelty. So in terms of the activeness of that, it's huge. And I guess linking back to something that I think that I said earlier around kind of how malleable it is. So because it's gone through all of these different stages, it's really flexible. So it's an ideal time for learning because of its flexibility. And it's kind of during this time that habits or things that are done often are kind of, they start and become much stronger and solidified, and maybe the things that aren't used as much kind of get pruned out. But in terms of activity, if we were to wire it up, it would be pretty illuminated, for sure, just due to the due to the various changes that are going on in the different regions of the brain, due to the various different networks that are forming the connections from the emotional to the logical part, from the emotional to the logical part of the brain. There's a hell of a lot of activity going on there. Even if we think about sleep time, adolescents experience different circadian rhythms to what we do as adults. They naturally want to go to bed later and get up later. And again, kind of just, I guess, linking into everything that's going on from a developmental standpoint. So lots of activity, lots of change, which in turn presents for some, and then for us, high levels of challenge.
Yeah, so in total, and there's not really much to think about, is there, when coaching adolescents. But in all seriousness, you mentioned on the workshop that teenage brains are wired up to be impatient and impulsive. You mentioned it earlier, they're unable to understand sort of others' viewpoints as well, so that's where the impulsiveness comes from. How can we frame sessions and develop and support people in this sort of stage of adolescence?
I actually think that this part of being an adolescent, where they are impulsive, impatient, quite reactive, lends itself quite nicely to how we then might structure or design coaching practices. So during adolescence, what we also see is an increase in their risk-taking behaviours. So they'll, as adults, we'll kind of, is this safe? Is this right? Is everything how it needs to be? We've planned it. What if? Plan B? Yeah, they're not as much like that. So from I guess a coaching standpoint, almost playing to the fact that we know they're going to be impulsive, we know they're going to be impatient. So how do we design sessions and structure sessions whereby it'll almost lend itself to some of the characteristics that we see of these ages? How we might structure parts of the session whereby they experience lots of success, how we might structure or integrate parts of the session whereby actually they've got to take a risk to, are you going to risk it to win, or are you going to play it safe? Almost play into that part of their brain of that risk taking and that threat perception, whereby it actually ignites it, but in a really healthy and facilitative way. So I guess rather than thinking, right, how do I work against this impulsiveness, high risk taking, sensitivity, kind of socially sensitive young person, how can I play to it, and how can I use some of this stuff that I now know from a development standpoint to my advantage when I'm planning sessions? So almost working with it rather than being like, right, how am I going to manage this? How am I going to deal with it? Actually, I'm going to work with it, and I'm going to as a coach or deliverer, I'm going to craft that knowledge that I have into something that then lends itself to a session that is developmentally tailored for an adolescent.
My mind's blown. So I don't know how we're going to get all this information out to the listeners, but one note I jotted down was, you mentioned earlier that the emotional part of the brain is 5 times more powerful than the logic, and that all messages go to the emotional brain first.
Yeah.
So for somebody, say like me, who's not had much exposure to the 2 different parts of the brain, can you just give us an insight into that and what challenges we may face as coaches?
Yeah, so I guess just due to our wiring, messages are going to go to our emotional brain, our emotional brain first, and it's not logical, it's not rational, and that's where the development of the connections between the emotional brain and the logical, rational thinking brain are really important. And it's not in its development strategies whereby, in some of them I've talked about today, that when that emotional brain does fire up, and it does in us as adults, there's certain things that trigger our emotions, and from whether you're talking about an adolescent or you're talking about an adult, like having strategies in your toolbox to help you manage maybe some of the emotions that you know that you're going to find slightly more challenging is really important. But again, that's something that's really novel and new to a young person. They don't know what those strategies are. They've not. It's kind of a little bit of trial and error, if you like. But I think just that basic awareness of recognizing that we do have this emotional part of our brain. It's not rational. It's quite black and white. It's quite judgmental. It's reactive. It's impulsive, and it is super powerful. But we've also got, you know, a huge part of our brain that's responsible for rational, logical decision making that can help us with different strategies and techniques to manage that. You know, when that emotional brain fires off is really important. So without being a neuroscientist or having, you know, done a PhD in adolescent emotional development, actually just by knowing the basics of that, these like almost there's two systems. They're kind of a dual systems model. We've got the emotional brain, we've got the logical rational thinking brain. The development of emotion related skills is a developmental journey, if you like, but actually in a performance environment, there is something that we can do to almost fast track or facilitate some of the development of those skills. And that comes through having an awareness and knowledge of some of the stuff that we've talked about today, but also then thinking, okay, so I've got this knowledge and understanding now. How do I then craft that how do I then craft that knowledge to facilitate the delivery of a session or a practice that I'm running?
I mean, with all that to take in mind, and you know how deep we've gone with that, one of the things that are in big bold letters on my notepad from the workshop is, why fit in when you're born to stand out? You know, what would you say around that to any player that, or coaches that are looking to stifle creativity in this part of adolescence? And you know,
I think it's it'll be a battle, like especially for or especially when you're working with young people who maybe are very emotional and who maybe don't have the strategies to manage those emotions particularly well, almost trying to work against that, or trying to work in such a way that that doesn't almost accept or facilitate that developmental journey is going to make your life and role really difficult. And I guess that kind of, you know, that point kind of links back to the social development challenges that we spoke a little bit about earlier, like in almost the conflict sometimes that young people come in as in a football team or in a high performance environment. Like, you do want to be the one that's picked, you do want to be the one that the coach talks about, yet also then the other side is that, oh, but I want to fit in with my friends and I want them to like me. So I think just recognizing in any sort of performance environment, no matter what the level is, there's that social conflict of, I want to fit in and I want to find out where, you know, socially how I operate in this group, and nobody, especially a young person, nobody doesn't want to be part of something, but you know, and have those connections. But at the same time, I want to be picked for that starting 11 on Sunday, or I want to be the one who gets my scholarship, or I want to be the one who gets the full time, gets on the full-time program. So then I have got to try and stand out, and that's almost a constant battle that I think a lot of young people will go through, especially those in performance environments.
So how do we take good to great and great to elite?
Oh, big question.
I'm sure we could do a whole nother podcast on that one. But
yeah, definitely. I think the first thing for me would be that it's about holistic player development. Okay. We're all one cog in a very big wheel of things. And I think not, psychology, and especially in football, is slightly late at the party. It's something that, we're starting to recognize is important. We're starting to be a bit more proactive with and less reactive. And we're starting to recognize actually the importance of this developmental understanding and some of the stuff that we've talked about today. But I really do think that to take, that would be kind of top of my list, that it is about holistic development. I say that's top of my list. I'm going to trump it with something else, is that I think it starts with the person. I think if you can as a coach, as sports psych support, as the S&C, as the physio, as the teacher, if you can connect with the person first, then actually the performance or the achievement or whatever it is that is the next thing, should happen second. And I think that person connection is fundamental. And interestingly, it links with I did a webinar earlier this afternoon, and Sean Wright Phillips came on and talked about some of his experiences as a kind of coming through the youth system and kind of going into the senior game. And one of the things that him and I talked about was actually small things can make big differences, especially for a young player. And those small things aren't often performance related things, they're often person related things. And that sense of genuineness and realism about the connections and the communications and the relationships that you bring, I think will really bring out the greatness in any young person, because it develops that trust in that relationship. I then think, kind of linked to a lot of what I've spoken about on this call, developmentally attuning your practice is absolutely fundamental. So practicing in a developmentally aware and appropriate way. So recognizing that, you know, children aren't mini adults, they're, you know, and you know, understanding the period of adolescence and the different sub phases that exist within that allows you to really tailor the delivery of your work. So I think that would also be a huge one. I think in any performance setting, whereby there's, again, like kind of removing the level, because it's all relative, right? So if I play for my local team on a Sunday and you play for Barcelona Academy, like, you know, we're still going to maybe both get nervous, we're still going to maybe both feel stressed, and it's relative to me for me playing on a Sunday in my local team, and it's relative for you playing for Barcelona. So I think taking good to great also involves recognizing that in performance environments there's going to be an element of challenge. So whatever that element of challenge is, there needs to be support there to just kind of not necessarily match it, but just make sure that that person is okay. And because it's that slight difference that's going to be the development bit. And then I guess the final thing would be never losing the enjoyment, especially in children and young people. The minute that enjoyment goes, the minute that smile doesn't happen, the minute that laugh doesn't sound in a session, then I'm not sure where you're going. And ironically, that was also something that Sean spoke about in our webinar earlier this afternoon, that he had that enjoyment, yes, challenges throughout his career, but that enjoyment and that love for the game was always there. And I think us as support staff and coaches have got to be careful that we don't kill that.
Yeah, I agree.
Through not deliberately, but through maybe some of the ways that we practice or things that we do, which is all done with great intention, I'm sure, but keeping that enjoyment and that passion and that love for the game, that, you know, is, and I don't know how you give that, but I do definitely know how you kill it.
Two powerful messages there. And as I say, small things can make big differences, and don't lose the enjoyment. Don't, as you mentioned there, the love of the game. I'm really conscious that I've taken up a lot of your evening, and
it's flown. I don't even know what time it is.
Well, we've been on now for about an hour and 15, which is,
wow, no way. I talk too much. This is what you get when you get somebody from the Northeast on a podcast call.
then, well, I think my pen's on fire, and the amount of notes I've taken down personally. Just, you know, for the future, how can listeners follow your work, and, you know, if they're interested in the psych side of the game and the, you know, adolescent brain, and how can they follow that?
So yeah, I use social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, and where I can, I ought, like, you know, I'm sure as everyone does, you kind of get requests to network, and and LinkedIn, and I always try and adhere. That's how we became connected again, just through a LinkedIn message. And so I do try and kind of promote and whether it is sharing things that I've read or found useful, or sharing some of my own work. So I do use social media. More than happy for kind of an email address to be shared, and people to drop me an email. But yeah, I guess from a work standpoint as well, like, I'm hoping now that the PhD is finished to go on to kind of publish some of that work that's sat within there. But again, that kind of just try and share that kind of within through the realms of social media. But always keen to network and kind of get in touch with like-minded, passionate people who are keen to talk about some of this stuff.
Fantastic. What does the future hold for you now then, Philippa? You mentioned obviously the PhD is complete. Is the roles to go back to? Is the new projects on the line, or is it all dependent?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. So there's hopefully going to be some new kind of avenues to explore in new sports, which I'm super excited about. That was one of the main reasons for me kind of going self-employed, was to get kind of greater variety and be able to take principles of performance psychology kind of outside the elite sport environment and into education and business. And so yeah, there's some new things, fingers crossed, once we get through this COVID and things start to go back to whatever normal is going to be. That'll be on the horizon. But yeah, definitely kind of continue the connections and the consultancy work that I had in place before that. The work that I'm doing with the guys at Mindflick at the moment is phenomenal. They've adapted very, very quickly, and are doing some great freebies and webinars and things. So yeah, a little bit of what was, and hopefully a little bit of new stuff as well.
Fantastic. I'm sure it'll be a success in whatever it is that you do. To finish off, we do have a quick fire question round. It is usually based around playing or coaching. So I've tried to adapt these a little bit.
Good.
Biggest wow moment to date?
I honestly think, this is, I guess, very recent, but finishing the PhD, I don't think I ever thought I was going to do that.
Okay. Biggest influence on your work?
Can I only give one?
Nope, reel them off.
Okay. I probably got three. Cherry Daly, so who was the head of psychology when I was at Manchester City Academy, who I then took over when she left that role. A massive influence in terms of my development. Learned so much from her, and so grateful for the opportunity she afforded me. Second one, Andy Rogers from Change Your Mind, so a clinical psychologist that's also working within kind of the sports arena. Again, just his ways of thinking kind of stimulated new thinking in me, thinking that I never probably would have done or even looked into if I hadn't have met him, and he hadn't have given me a different perspective, given his clinical background. So Andy would be another one, and then a third one would be Grant Downey. So Grant Downey was the head of performance at Manchester City, across all the performance staff. And from a personal and professional standpoint, Grant has been one of the best people I've ever met, and the biggest influences on me, for sure.
Fantastic. Best coach you've worked with?
Do you know what it is? There's so many. But if just kind of going off the theme of what we've been talking about today, Adam Temple, who was a coach who I worked with at Manchester City, his openness to learning and passion for supporting young players, and supporting and developing young players was unbelievable, and I loved working with him. He was a great colleague, and he's now a dear friend. But from a coaching standpoint, I don't think I've ever really worked with a coach like him. And he was really great to work with.
Some high praise there. Best player you've worked with?
Oh my God, that's even harder. That's impossible to answer. There's there's been so many over the past 11, 12 years now that that I've worked with. I could not possibly give a name, but I think you do it for them, right? But there's so many. I can't, rubbish answer, but I can't answer that.
That's fine. This will probably be a bit more tricky then as well. Developing the player or developing the coach?
Oh no, a lot easier. Develop as a psych, working with and through your coach. Okay. To then develop the player. You're never going to get as much time or as contact time as a coach does. So if they can be your direct point of contact and you can kind of instill what they can then go on and use, work with and through the coach every day.
I thought that was going to be a difficult one then. Is there anybody you would recommend or like to hear on the podcast?
I think Grant Downey would be great, Grant has a wealth of experience in football, the professional game in the first part of his career, and then the latter part in academy. He's a great storyteller and has a hell of a lot of knowledge. I could listen to him every day. So yeah, Grant would be definitely get him on your hit list.
Will do. It's a never growing list, but he's added to it, and we'll get him on. Philippa, it's been absolutely immense to speak to you today. Thank you ever so much for giving us some of your time to offer an insight into the adolescent brain and all things psychology, and how we as coaches can support our people and therefore players. I want to wish you well and everything that you do moving forward.
Thank you so
stay
much.
safe for the remainder of lockdown, however long that may be. And I say, just stay safe and well, and thank you for sharing your expertise today.
You too. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Philippa.
Thanks.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Bye.
DuckTig brand is on hand for all of your coaching needs. Whether it be to plan sessions or take notes whilst observing games, DuckTig are able to cover all of your needs. Use the discount code Irvine20 at checkout to receive a discount. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy the content that we're trying to bring to you. Don't forget, new episodes will be released every Monday. You can find us on the iTunes Store, Spotify, and if you want to see the video, you can see it on our YouTube channel, PCT Football Coaching.